The Vault Hunters are always one of the most crucial elements to any Borderlands game when it comes to defining your playstyle and creating an enjoyable experience within the game, and that is not going to be any different in Borderlands 4, with 4 completely new Vault Hunters to choose from. And so today, for the first out of those 4 new characters, I wanted to run you guys through everything we know so far about AMON, the Forge Knight Vault Hunter in Borderlands 4. Now we're going to be going through his traits, his action skills, as well as some of the skill tree elements as well. But before we do that, a quick overview of who AMON is as a character is that he is essentially described as a big brute of a Viking, and the devs have actually confirmed that he is the biggest character that they've ever made in terms of playable characters anyway, being even taller than Brick from Borderlands 1. So for any of you who enjoy playing the bigger characters, I think AMON is already right up your alley, and I think to me personally, he does look like one of the most enjoyable in Borderlands 4. Now, his description here says, AMON was raised in a vault monster worshipping cult until the vault was opened and the creature turned on everyone he loved. As the only survivor, he dedicates his life to finding and killing as many of these beasts as he can. AMON, a warrior poet, is introspective and unflinching to his duty, but despite his hardened appearance, he has a warm attitude, often regaling comrades in arms with stories and advice earned throughout his travels. Now, moving on to the traits that AMON is going to have, he actually has a pretty unique trait called Forge Skill, where you almost get extra but sort of smaller little action skills based on the action skill that you currently have activated. And so the action skills that we'll go through in a minute will line up with these Forge skills that I'm going to run you guys through now. First and foremost, we have Molten Slam, which is tied to the Onslaughter action skill that we'll talk through in a second. If you have that equipped, then the Molten Slam will be equipped as well. With this trait, you can press and hold the action skill button to slam a Molten Forge Hammer into the ground, dealing incendiary melee damage to enemies that are in a large area. They have confirmed that the area of effect on this is pretty damn big, and so this is going to be a great ability to use if you're kind of getting swarmed by enemies, especially if you're up close and personal. This one seems like it is going to be very useful to use. Next up, we have Firewall, which is tied to the Scourge action skill, and for this you can press and hold the action skill button to deploy a firewall that actually absorbs enemy projectiles, so it's essentially a shield, but it also grants friendly projectiles that pass through it. So you can still shoot through it. If you're playing with friends, they can shoot through it as well. But on top of just shooting through it, it actually deals increased damage to those bullets, as well as increased projectile speed as well, which is going to be interesting to see when it comes to shooting rockets, for example. If they go a hell of a lot faster, this might be an absolutely overpowered tactic to just kind of stand behind the firewall and spam rockets at bosses, for example. Now, on top of just acting like a shield, enemies that are near the firewall will actually take incendiary damage as well. And so this thing seems like it's going to be very, very useful, not only being a shield, but increasing your damage and also just passively damaging enemies as well. Lastly, for the traits, we have the double-edged trait, which is linked to the Crucible action skill. For this one, you can press and hold the action skill button to throw a twinned forge axe. So he will essentially combine both of his axes into almost a double-bladed axe and then throw that almost like a boomerang. It'll deal cryo damage to enemies that it passes through, so it'll essentially freeze those enemies, and it will then return to AMON, but on the way back it deals incendiary damage to those enemies as well. So if you hit someone with this and essentially freeze them and then hit them on the way back with incendiary damage, that is obviously going to deal crazy damage. And in a lot of cases with these smaller, sort of weaker enemies, you may just simply one-hit kill them because they may become frozen and then essentially be melted by that incendiary damage. Now, before we go any further, if you guys are interested in more Borderlands 4 content and you are new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. There is plenty more content on the way. I'll obviously be doing one of these breakdowns for all 3 of the other characters too, plus plenty more, and obviously a lot more after launch too. So be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on all of that upcoming content. Now, moving on, we also then have his action skills, which are essentially the big ability that each character is going to have. In previous games, we only really had one action skill, whereas now you can actually cycle between 3 of them, and all 3 of AMON's sound very, very good. Now, the first one is called Onslaught. The description says that AMON will overload his Forge Fist, gaining constant shield regeneration, bonus incendiary damage on his guns, and also increased movement speed as well. You can then also press the action skill or melee to Rocket Punch, which will essentially dash you to the targeted enemy, dealing even more incendiary damage, not only to the enemy, but just in short-ranged cone, so it will actually deal almost area of effect damage to nearby enemies too, and it can also cause a stagger. Now, it won't stagger bosses, but badasses do have a chance to be staggered, and obviously all of the weaker enemies will definitely be staggered. So this one sounds like a very, very good action skill. The next action skill he has is called Scourge, and the description for this one reads, Amon equips a forged shield that absorbs all frontal damage as Vengeance. Whenever the Vengeance meter is filled, Forged Shield provides damage reduction instead. Vengeance will drain rapidly if it has not been gained recently. You can then also use the action skill to launch a Forge Wave, which will deal cryo ordnance damage to enemies that it passes through, consuming Vengeance to increase the damage dealt. Now, it seems like that sort of shield that I mentioned earlier for his trait, this is linked to that, and it means that with the action skill, I believe this will actually send the shield forwards, almost acting like a moving shield that will then pass through enemies and obviously deal damage, like I mentioned earlier. Now, lastly, for his action skills, he has the Crucible action skill. This one is a charge skill, and it says that Amon readies his forge axes that can be thrown and picked up off the ground to refund the cooldown, so you can actually pick them back up and essentially be able to use them more often than if you don't pick them up. You can throw a flame axe, which will obviously deal incendiary damage, or a frost axe instead, dealing cryo damage instead of incendiary damage. Now, the enemies that are damaged by these forge axes, they're actually primed for a duration, and priming those enemies will essentially detonate them when they die, or when they're damaged by a forge skill, which will then also deal damage to nearby enemies. So you can prime them, they will then detonate when they die, and that will damage anyone around them, which sounds very, very fun to me. Now, last but not least, we also do have some information on all of Amon's skill trees. He has 3 different skill trees, as all of the Vault Hunters do, allowing us to very much customize how we sort of craft these characters. Now, the first skill tree is called Calamity, and this one is heavily focused on a sort of melee-centric elemental brawler playstyle. So if you like that up close and personal type of gameplay, this one definitely seems like you're going to want to focus on this Calamity skill tree. Now, despite being melee centric as well, it'll use shields as not only defensive, but also an offensive resource too. The description says that the tree revolves around getting close to enemies, dealing melee damage to trigger buffs and restore resources, and using his powerful forge skills to deal burst damage and status effects. Now, within each of these skill trees too, there is 3 different branches. So realistically, there's kind of 9 skill trees for each character. I know that's not quite how it works, but there are essentially 9 branches that you can level up. Now, for the left branch within the Calamity skill tree, this one is mostly focused on a cryo / melee brawler type of build, so this is more freezing and melee type attacks. The middle branch is focused more on incendiary damage as well as being more of a shield based brawler, and then the right branch is almost a little bit of a combo, but this one actually includes shock damage instead of cryo or incendiary damage. So all of those sound like a lot of fun to me. I do enjoy a melee playstyle when it comes to Borderlands, and so that skill tree sounds right up my alley. Now, for the next skill tree, this one is the Vengeance skill tree, and the description reads, Amon's Vengeance skill tree is heavily focused on a ranged elemental based playstyle that uses a combination of guns, ordnance, and his forge skill to deal damage and control the battlefield. The core gameplay loop revolves around generating and spending a resource called Vengeance to amplify his attacks, and specializing in one of 3 elements: incendiary, cryo, or shock. For the left branch, this one focuses mostly on the incendiary damage as well as ordnance. So ordnance is essentially like grenades and rockets and stuff like that. The middle branch focuses more on cryo, so freezing enemies, but also gunplay too. And then the right branch focuses mostly on that shock elemental damage, but also focuses on critical hits too. Now, last but definitely not least, for the final skill tree, this is the Cybernetics skill tree, and the description reads, Amon's Cybernetics skill tree is heavily focused on elemental combat and a synergistic loop between gunplay, detonations, and his forge skills, as well as forge drones. The core gameplay loop revolves around applying elemental status effects to prime your enemies, then detonating them for massive damage and various cooldown benefits. So this one definitely links with that Crucible action skill that I mentioned earlier, And just like all of these skill trees, this one sounds very fun to build out. Now, the left branch will mostly focus on cryo and ordnance elements. The middle branch will focus more on shock and critical hit, so similar to the right branch in the previous skill tree. And then the right branch for this final skill tree will focus on incendiary damage as well as actually mixed elements, which sounds like a lot of fun. So not only just using one element, but you might be able to pair shock and incendiary, for example, which I think sounds very, very fun to me. But that is it for essentially everything that we know so far about AMON, the Forge Knight Vault Hunter in Borderlands 4. I'm keen to hear all of your thoughts on AMON. If you guys are interested in playing him, let me know down below. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.